So my name is Mwangi Masharia. I teach communication at Strathmore University. My area of interest is digital media and digital communication, and I have some areas within that area that I am most interested in, and one of them is measurement. Measurement has to do with evaluation and monitoring of communication. Yes.
Could you please explain a bit about what measurement and evaluation is?
Measurement is about telling whether you have achieved the objectives that you had set for whatever communication activity you've set to do. So whenever you're communicating, or whenever you have a strategy on something that you want to do in communication, you first set objectives. Measurement comes within the duration of the activity that you're doing, and also at the end, where you assess the extent to which you have met the objectives that you've set. Unfortunately for most people, measurement never happens. So we say that the most risky thing about communication is the illusion that has happened. So whenever people send out messages, they believe that the messages have been received the way they wanted them to be received. So that is not normally the case all the time. So you need to measure, you need to assess whether the messages were received and whether they were received in the same manner that you wanted them to be received.
Okay.
Yes.
So that is measurement.
Yes, measurement.
What about evaluation?
Measurement has two components: evaluation and monitoring. Now, evaluation mostly comes at the end of an activity. Monitoring is continuous from the beginning of an activity to the end. So all of them comprise, measurement is comprised of the two components.
Okay, thank you. So how can you use measurements to assess whether your brand is growing or whether it's stagnating, especially for digital communication?
We start measurement with a baseline. And a baseline is how things are before an intervention is made. So you measure how many people are aware of your brand, for example. And then after you do certain activities, communication, you measure again how many people are aware of the brand, if that is what you intended to do. So that is how you go about it.
How do you measure your baseline?
There are quite a number of tools that you can use to measure baseline, research tools. You can do it either quantitatively or qualitatively. If you want to do it qualitatively, you conduct interviews, such as this one you're doing, or focus group discussions. If you want to do it quantitatively, you develop some tools, survey tools, questionnaires, which you send to your respondents. So basically, that is what you do.
Right.
Yes.
So you've mentioned baseline, measuring the state it is before you do the activities you planned, and then you measure again after you've finished. What other strategy can you use? So
after you measure the baseline, you have to come up with a way in which you're going to collect your data. Now, this depends on what tools you're using to communicate your messages. And mostly we have two types of tools. We talk about traditional tools such as TV, radio, and newspaper, and digital tools or new media. So the strategy that you take depends on the tool that you are measuring. If you're measuring communication on newspapers, you're going to use such things as content analysis. If it's radio, again, content analysis could be used. If it's TV, there are also other ways in which you can collect such data. You can measure such things as impressions, how many people have viewed a certain item that you've released, something like that. When it comes to social media or new media, most of those tools come with their own analytics. So there's a section of that tool that has analytic data. They show the kind of engagement that you've engaged in, or the nature of engagement. They also indicate the following, the number of people who have followed certain posts, how many people have watched certain posts, how many people have responded to them. And besides those analytics, you can also use some separate tools, such websites such as BuzzSumo. We have Meltwater. There are so many other analytic tools that you can get. Some of them are free source and others are proprietary. You can obtain them from different places, and they can give you data very easily on communication that you engaged in social media.
All right. So I'm guessing once you have already used the tools, then you can determine the nature of your engagement, for example. So after you do that, when you change your communication to something else, maybe what you did wasn't working, do you start from the baseline again, or do you use the goals that you had already set before?
It's a good question. You can have a new baseline. So based on the achievements that you had got from the earlier tactics, you can see whether there's a change between the period you've changed the tactics to the period that you want to measure. But also you cannot forget that you also have the original baseline, which is very important.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Last question. So for someone who doesn't have the resources to, for example, put their ad on TV or pay for those tools, what are the simple ways that they can use measurement to grow their brand whilst they wait for a stage where they can afford to, use those other tools that require a lot of money?
Yes, so I'd say the best tools that we have, such as Meltwater, are quite costly and out of reach for many people and businesses. So the best thing to do is to make use of the on-site analytics that we have within those social media platforms. So if you go to Twitter, there's a section that will give you the analytics, Facebook, whichever tool you're going to use.
All right.
Yes.
So,
so you can do it organically without having to incur any cost. You just need the know-how on how to mine the data that is available. Although proprietary software has advantages because it give you data on so many other aspects, even besides what you can get from the on-site analytics. Yes. So perhaps for a small business or a startup, just use the on-site analytics. Yes. Okay,
so that is for online. What about offline measurement, like when you're not on digital media?
For traditional media, again, you may not need to incur huge costs to do measurement, because if you have time, you can flip through newspapers. And the good thing about newspapers these days is that we have soft copies. So you can just do a simple search. You find the mention of your brand within the newspaper, especially for online ones. It's a bit tricky for radio, because for radio you just have to listen, and it may take so much time to listen to everything. But for newspapers, unlike TV and radio, it's easier, especially when you have the online version of it.
Okay. Yeah. What about where there's no media? So for example, when you're interacting with customers on a day-to-day basis, is there something that you can do to measure, or do you have to just use the focus groups?
That's interesting. Now, when you are not using any mediated communication, maybe face-to-face, such things as customer care, there are tools that you can use. You can use a customer care survey. So you can just give them papers to fill in. I think you've seen that in hospitals and in some banks, where you're told to comment about the service that you've just received. You could also use such things as just direct observation. You could also do what you call social listening. Social listening, okay, of course that is related to social media. You can go to social media to see what your customers are saying without interviewing them. You just look at the mentions and how you've been mentioned on social spaces. And maybe another way of doing that is to have a toll-free number for people to call if they want to appreciate your services or if they want to complain about that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for this interview. This interview was about branding and how you can use measurement to build or maintain your brand.
Thank you. Thank you so much too. I appreciate this, and I think I like what you're doing. The only thing that I would like to say is that when you go out there, especially in the world of work, embrace measurement. Communicating results is the only way you can buy in for communication from management in certain organizations. So you need to be very, very careful about that, and never embark on any communication activity without having planned on how you're going to measure the results.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay,
All the
thank
best.
you.